Let me tell you a story about the great office prank war. It all started with a simple whoopee cushion. Harmless, right? Well, that's what I thought when I placed it on my coworker Jeff's chair one Friday afternoon. Jeff was the kind of guy who was always pulling pranks on everyone else in the office, so I figured it was time for a little payback. I watched from my cubicle as Jeff sauntered back to his desk, a cup of coffee in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. He plopped down in his chair and the whoopee cushion let out a loud, obnoxious fart noise. The whole office erupted in laughter and Jeff turned bright red, but he took it in stride, laughing along with everyone else. But you know this means war. I didn't think much of it at the time. A little prank war sounded fun, a way to spice up our otherwise monotonous work days, but I had no idea what I was getting myself into. The following Monday, I arrived at work to find my cubicle covered in post-it notes. Every inch of my desk, chair, computer, and even my coffee mug was plastered with neon yellow notes. I couldn't help but laugh at the sheer effort Jeff had put into it. It took me half an hour to peel them all off and get settled. "Alright, Jeff, game on," I muttered under my breath. For my next move, I filled his entire drawer with packing peanuts. When he opened it to grab a pen, they spilled out all over his lap. He glared at me, but I could see the wheels turning in his head, already plotting his revenge. And so it went. Every day, a new prank. Jeff swapped the sugar in my coffee for salt one morning. I replaced his pens with ones that shocked him when he tried to use them. He rigged my computer mouse with a piece of tape over the sensor. I installed a tiny air horn under his chair that went off whenever he sat down. The whole office got in on the fun. Bets were placed on who would out-prank the other, and alliances were formed. Our boss, Mr. Thompson, pretended to be annoyed, but I caught him chuckling more than once. Then came the day of the ultimate prank. I had been planning it for a week. I arrived at the office extra early and set everything up. When Jeff came in, I watched as he tried to log into his computer. I had replaced his keyboard with one that was completely blank, no letters, no numbers, just a sea of black keys. He stared at it in confusion, then looked over at me. "Nice try, Sarah, but I can touch type." "Good luck with the mouse," I replied, smirking. He reached for his mouse and tried to move the cursor, but nothing happened. I had swapped it with a brick-shaped paperweight that looked identical to his mouse. Jeff sighed, realizing he'd been bested, but I knew he wouldn't give up that easily. Sure enough, the next day, I came into work to find my entire cubicle wrapped in plastic wrap. Desk, chair, computer, everything. It was like a giant, clear cocoon. I had to cut my way in just to start my day. This prank war continued for weeks, escalating to ridiculous heights. Fake spiders in drawers, rigged staplers, even a classic bucket of water over the door, which fortunately missed me and soaked poor Janet from accounting instead. But the grand finale came unexpectedly. Jeff had been conspiring with the IT department, and on April Fool's Day, he pulled off the most elaborate prank yet. As I logged into my computer, a video started playing on every screen in the office. It was a compilation of all our pranks set to dramatic music, complete with slow-motion replays and humorous commentary. Everyone gathered around, laughing and pointing at the screen. Even Mr. Thompson couldn't keep a straight face. At the end of the video, there was a message. "Truce?" I looked over at Jeff, who was grinning from ear to ear. I nodded. "Truce." We shook hands, and the office erupted in applause. The prank war was over, and I had to admit I was a little relieved. It had been fun, but it was time to get back to work, or at least try to. From that day on, Jeff and I became good friends. We still pulled the occasional prank, but nothing as intense as our epic battle. And whenever a new hire came on board, we'd tell them the legend of the great office prank war, laughing at the memories of those crazy, hilarious weeks. Let me show you another story about the day my Roomba became self-aware. So, this all started on a Thursday afternoon. I was lounging on the couch, binge-watching my favorite series, when I heard a strange noise coming from the hallway. Now, my Roomba, affectionately named Robbie, had a tendency to get stuck under furniture or bump into walls, so I didn't think much of it. I lazily glanced over to see what mischief it was up to this time. To my surprise, Robbie wasn't just vacuuming aimlessly, it seemed to have a purpose. It was spinning around in circles, beeping rhythmically, almost like it was trying to communicate. Intrigued, I paused my show and went over to see what was going on. "Hey Robbie, you alright?" I asked, feeling a bit silly talking to a vacuum cleaner. But then Robbie did something unexpected. It stopped spinning and beeped 3 times in a row, almost as if it were responding to me. "Okay, that's weird," I muttered, deciding it was time to check the manual. As I flipped through the pages, Robbie began to move again, this time heading straight for the kitchen. I followed, curiosity piqued. Robbie stopped in front of the fridge and beeped again, this time in a different pattern. I opened the fridge, half expecting some sort of mess or spill. Instead, I found nothing out of the ordinary, but Robbie kept beeping insistently. "What do you want?" I asked, exasperated, and then it hit me, maybe Robbie had become self-aware. I know, it sounds crazy, but after the whole chicken mayor incident in our town, I was open to anything. I grabbed my phone and started recording. "Alright, Robbie, show me what you want." The Roomba backed up a bit, turned around, and headed towards the living room. I followed, wondering if I'd lost my mind. Robbie stopped in front of the couch and started beeping again, a little tune that was almost catchy. I noticed something under the couch, a small dusty piece of paper. I reached down and pulled it out, revealing an old grocery list I'd lost weeks ago. "Okay, so you found my grocery list. Thanks, buddy." I chuckled, but Robbie wasn't done. It rolled over to the bookshelf and beeped again. This time, I found my missing car keys wedged between some books. "Alright, you're officially a genius," I declared, half joking. But as the day went on, Robbie continued to lead me to lost items around the house. A sock behind the dryer, a pen under the rug, and even a remote control buried in the couch cushions. It was like having a robotic bloodhound. I decided to call my best friend, Sarah, to share the bizarre news. "You're not going to believe this, but I think my Roomba is self-aware," I said. Sarah laughed. "Have you been drinking? Roombas don't just become self-aware." "I'm serious, it's been finding lost stuff all day." She agreed to come over and see for herself. When she arrived, I explained everything and showed her the footage I'd recorded. She was skeptical but intrigued. "Alright, Robbie, show us something else," Sarah challenged. The Roomba beeped, spun in a circle, and headed for the bedroom. We followed, exchanging curious glances. Robbie stopped in front of my closet and beeped again. I opened the door, unsure of what to expect. There, on the floor, was a dusty old photo album I hadn't seen in years. I picked it up, flipping through the pages with Sarah by my side. "This is amazing," Sarah said, shaking her head in disbelief. "You have the world's first self-aware Roomba." We spent the next few hours testing Robbie's abilities, finding more lost items, and marveling at its apparent intelligence. By the end of the day, we were convinced Robbie was special. News of my extraordinary Roomba spread quickly. Soon, reporters and tech enthusiasts were knocking on my door, eager to meet Robbie. The local news did a segment on us, dubbing Robbie the Wonder Roomba. Scientists wanted to study it, but I refused to let them take Robbie apart. Life with Robbie became a delightful adventure. It continued to help me find lost items, and I even started using it to locate things for my friends and neighbors. Robbie became a beloved local celebrity, and I couldn't have been prouder of my little robotic friend. Looking back, that Thursday afternoon changed my life in the most unexpected and hilarious way. I went from having a regular Roomba to having a self-aware, incredibly helpful companion. And who knows, maybe one day Robbie will run for mayor too. Let me tell you another story about the misadventures of Phil and the uninvited raccoon. It all started with a pizza. Not just any pizza, but a leftover pepperoni pizza I had stashed in the fridge, eagerly awaiting consumption after a long day at work. Little did I know that pizza would lead to one of the most bizarre nights of my life. It was a Friday evening, and I had just gotten home from the office. I kicked off my shoes, loosened my tie, and made a beeline for the fridge. As I opened the door, I noticed something odd. The pizza box was slightly ajar, and there were crumbs leading out of the fridge and across the kitchen floor. "Huh," I muttered. "Maybe I didn't close it properly." I grabbed the box and headed to the living room, plopped down on the couch, and flipped on the TV. As I reached for a slice, I heard a rustling sound coming from behind the couch. I paused, slice in hand, and listened. The rustling continued, followed by a faint squeak. Curiosity got the better of me. I put the pizza slice back in the box and slowly crept around the couch. That's when I saw it. A raccoon, casually munching on what appeared to be a piece of my pizza. It looked up at me with wide, guilty eyes. "Hey, that's my dinner!" I exclaimed. The raccoon didn't seem fazed. In fact, it continued to chew, as if mocking my protest. I lunged forward, hoping to scare it off, but instead, the raccoon bolted straight into the kitchen. "Great," I sighed. "Now I've got a raccoon in my house." I followed the raccoon into the kitchen, where it had somehow managed to climb onto the counter and was now inspecting a jar of peanut butter. I grabbed a broom, hoping to shoo it out the door, but the raccoon had other ideas. It knocked the jar off the counter, and peanut butter splattered everywhere. "Seriously?" I groaned. At this point, I realized I needed a better plan. I put down the broom and opened the back door, hoping the raccoon would take the hint and leave. Instead, it seemed to find the open door intriguing, but not enough to actually exit through it. It looked at me, then at the door, and then back at me, as if challenging me to make the first move. Desperate, I decided to try bribery. I grabbed a slice of pizza and held it out, hoping to lure the raccoon outside. The raccoon eyed the pizza, then slowly approached. Just as it was about to take a bite, I tossed the slice out the door. The raccoon hesitated for a moment, then scurried out after it. I quickly shut the door and locked it, breathing a sigh of relief. I turned around to survey the damage: peanut butter on the floor, crumbs everywhere, and my pizza ruined. I grabbed some cleaning supplies and started to tidy up, shaking my head at the absurdity of it all. Just when I thought the ordeal was over, I heard a scratching sound at the door. I peered through the window and saw the raccoon, now joined by two of its friends, all looking expectantly at the door. "No way," I said aloud. "You're not coming back in." I turned off the lights and retreated to my bedroom, hoping the raccoons would get the hint and leave. As I lay in bed, I couldn't help but laugh at the ridiculousness of the situation. Who knew a leftover pizza could lead to such chaos? The next morning, I cautiously opened the door to find the raccoons gone and my yard surprisingly clean. It seemed they had taken their party elsewhere. I made a mental note to be more careful with my leftovers in the future and to invest in a sturdier trash can. From that day on, I couldn't look at a pizza without thinking of my uninvited guests. And while it was a night I'd rather not repeat, it made for one heck of a story to tell my friends. After all, how many people can say they had a raccoon pizza party in their own home? Let me tell you another story about the day I became a bird whisperer. I've never been much of an animal person. Don't get me wrong, I think they're adorable. I just prefer them to stay at a comfortable distance. So imagine my surprise when I found myself at the center of a bird-related catastrophe that would turn me into the accidental bird whisperer of the neighborhood. It started on a sunny Saturday morning. I was sitting on my porch, sipping coffee and reading the newspaper, enjoying the rare moment of peace. That's when I heard the fluttering. I looked up and saw a small blue parakeet perched on the edge of my porch railing, staring at me with what I could only describe as a look of expectation. "Shoo," I said, waving my hand. The bird didn't move. "Seriously, shoo," I tried again, but the bird just tilted its head as if considering my command. Sighing, I went back to my newspaper, figuring the bird would fly away on its own, but it didn't. Instead, it hopped closer, eventually landing on my shoulder. I froze. What was I supposed to do with the parakeet on my shoulder? After a few moments of awkward stillness, I decided to gently brush it off. But instead of flying away, the bird flew into my house, landing on the kitchen counter. I followed it inside, trying to coax it back out, but it just chirped at me, seemingly content with its new surroundings. "Great," I muttered, "just what I needed, a house guest." I grabbed my phone and called my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, who was known for her love of animals. She had a cat, 2 dogs, and a rabbit. If anyone knew what to do, it would be her. "Hello," she answered. "Hi, Mrs. Jenkins, it's me, Phil. I've got a bit of a situation," I explained. "What's wrong, dear?" "There's a parakeet in my house, and I have no idea what to do with it." "Oh, how lovely," she exclaimed. "I'll be right over." Lovely was not the word I would have used, but true to her word, Mrs. Jenkins arrived a few minutes later, armed with a bird cage and some seeds. "Oh, it's just precious," she cooed, approaching the bird. "Let's see if we can get it into the cage." After a bit of coaxing, we managed to lure the parakeet into the cage with some seeds. Mrs. Jenkins offered to take the bird, but for some reason I felt a strange sense of responsibility for it. After all, it had chosen my porch, my shoulder, and my kitchen counter. "I'll keep it for now," I said. "Maybe it belongs to someone nearby." Mrs. Jenkins agreed to help me make some lost bird posters, and we spent the afternoon hanging them around the neighborhood. I didn't expect much, but it was worth a shot. The next morning, I was awoken by a cacophony of chirping. Groggy and confused, I stumbled into the living room to find not 1 but 3 parakeets flitting around. Apparently, word had gotten out that my house was the new bird sanctuary. I called Mrs. Jenkins again. We have a problem. There are more birds now." "Oh dear," she said. "I'll be right over." Over the next few days, more birds appeared. Finches, sparrows, even a canary. My house had turned into an aviary. I learned more about bird care than I ever wanted to know, thanks to Mrs. Jenkins and her endless supply of bird-related knowledge. The posters worked, and I managed to reunite some of the birds with their owners, but others, like the original blue parakeet, stayed. I named him Buddy. Despite my initial reluctance, I found myself growing fond of the little guy. As the weeks passed, my house became known as the bird haven of the neighborhood. People would stop by to check on the birds, sometimes leaving treats or new toys. I even had a few kids asking if they could come over to see the birds after school. One evening, as I sat on my porch with Buddy perched on my shoulder, I couldn't help but laugh at how things had turned out. I had gone from a birdiverse guy to the unofficial bird whisperer of the block, and while it wasn't what I had planned, it wasn't so bad either. Sometimes life throws unexpected things at you. In my case, it was a flock of birds, but I learned to embrace the chaos, finding joy in the fluttering of wings and the cheerful chirps that now filled my home.